Watchmen Season 1 was an incredible journey that spans over 100 years, and if you're anything like me, you might have found yourself scratching your head as to when certain events occurred. With the use of flashbacks and episodes that look at events from a different character's perspective, it's easy to get lost. So in this video, we're going to chronologically break down the show's major events, starting from the earliest in the 1890s all the way up to present day. We'll even go over those Ozymandias flashbacks and see how they fit in with the other events of the show. Our earliest entries deal with the births of some important characters, starting in 1891 Louisiana with Obie Williams. He's Will Reeves' father and Angela's great-grandfather. He'll later end up moving to Tulsa and marrying a woman by the name of Ruth Robison, who becomes the pianist at the Dreamland Theater. Fast forward to 1908, where we have the birth of Nelson Forrest Gardner, aka Captain Metropolis, and founding member of the Minutemen. 6 years later, Will Reeves is born in 1914, Tulsa. By 1918, Obie Williams is shipped off to France to fight in World War I. It's here that he keeps hold of a German propaganda flyer made to dissuade the African-American forces from fighting against the Germans, considering how poorly they're treated by their country. He keeps this flyer, which Will later takes and holds on to for over 100 years. In May 1921, the Dreamland Theater premieres the Bass Reeves film Trust in the Law. The same film young Will watches a week later on May 31st during the Tulsa Massacre, a real-life event which saw, according to a 2001 state commission, anywhere from 30 to 300 deaths over a 2-day period. August 14th, 1929 sees the birth of John Osterman in Germany, the man who will later become Dr. Manhattan. 7 years later, in 1936, he and his Jewish father, fearing persecution in Germany, flee to England, where we meet the inspiration for Phillips and Miss Crookshanks at their manor. This refuge will later become a huge influence in Manhattan's creation of life on Europa. 1938 is a big year for Will Reeves. He graduates from Police Academy in New York and, seeing the injustice around him, takes matters into his own hand by creating the first masked vigilante, Hooded Justice. It's here we learn of the white supremacist group called Cyclops, which predates the 7th Cavalry. Hooded Justice takes a bunch of them down, garnering the attention of Nelson Gardner, who he will later have an affair with. In the television show American Hero Story, Hooded Justice is depicted as being a white male and saving the grocery store from robbers, whereas the real version sees Hooded Justice fleeing through the window after taking down a bunch of Klan members. In 1939, Captain Metropolis forms the Minutemen, a group of masked vigilantes which includes Hooded Justice as one of its founding members. In July of this year, Adrian Veidt is born in New York, the son of German immigrants. In the early 1940s, we have the birth of Marcus Abar, Angela's father. We don't have an exact year of birth, but we do see him as a child in the year 1947, which is the year The Secret Life of Walter Mitty plays at the theater which hypnotizes all its black patrons. It's this year that June, Will's wife, leaves him and takes Marcus to Tulsa as Will's obsession with Hooded Justice has taken too much toll on the family. 1949 sees the birth of Laurie Blake, the daughter of Edward Blake the comedian and Sally Jupiter, both original members of the Minutemen. 49 also happens to be the year the Minutemen disbands, according to Peteypedia, for reasons which includes tragedy, acrimony, and other factors. Judd Crawford was also born in this year. 1955 sees the body of Rolf Muller wash ashore, the man the world believes to be Hooded Justice. Just 3 years later, Adrian Veidt adopts the guise of Ozymandias and will later work for the next few decades alongside Dr. Manhattan, the comedian, Laurie Blake, Night Owl, and Rorschach as part of the Watchmen. Although not depicted in the show, August 1959 sees the birth of Dr. Manhattan when John Osterman is locked in the intrinsic field generator and blasted with atomic energy. The Vietnam War, particularly 1971, sees two interesting events. Judd serves under Robert Mueller in Vietnam, yes, the Robert Mueller who led the FBI investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. It's here we also learn from Peteypedia that Bien Mai, Lady True's mother, had a run-in with Edward Blake, who, it's highly intimated, burned down her village. 1974 sees the death of Captain Metropolis in a tragic car accident. His head was decapitated, but it was was never found. A year later in 75, Will Reeves receives Captain Metropolis's fortune as consolation for how he was treated by him in the 30s and 40s. It's here also that Adrian Veidt gives up being a vigilante and reveals his identity to the public. 1976 sees the birth of both Angela Abar and Calvin Jelani. Calvin's body will later become the form we see Dr. Manhattan in for the majority of the show. In 1977, the US passes the Keene Act, making civilian vigilantism illegal. It also happens to be the year Sister Night is released. 1 year later, in 1978, the Vietnam War is over and Vietnam becomes the 51st state. 1979, Adrian creates the tachyon ring he'll later give to Manhattan 30 years later. 1985 sees the main events of the Watchmen comic unfold. On October 19th, Manhattan abandons Earth for Europa. On the 31st of that month, Laurie Blake and Dan Dreiberg rescue Rorschach from prison only for him to go missing the next day. November 1st, Adrian records his video to future President Robert Redford in his Antarctic lab while Bian inseminates herself with Adrian's semen. The next day, on November 2nd, the Dimensional Incursion event occurs, the giant squid attack devised by Adrian to unite the world against a common enemy. It's here we also see part of Looking Glass's origin story as he witnessed the event firsthand at the beginning of episode 5. 9 months later, in August of 1986, the smartest woman in the world, Lady True, is born. And a year after that, in 87, an 11-year-old Angela Abar witnesses the death of her parents via terrorist attack in Saigon. Sometime later, she's met by her grandmother, June, who wants to take her back home to Tulsa, but she dies of a heart attack before that can happen, leaving Angela in Saigon, where she'll later take after her grandfather by becoming a police officer. 1992 sees the election of President Redford winning over Richard Nixon, who had held office for 24 years. His campaign was largely financed by Adrian Veidt. In 1993, President Redford will receive Adrian's video informing him that the 1985 squid attack was a hoax. It's Adrian's hope that he and Redford can work together to make the world a better place. Laurie Blake and Dan Dreiberg find themselves in hot water in 1995 when they're arrested for violating the Keene Act, an arrest which lands Dan in jail and Laurie having to work for the FBI's anti-vigilante task force. In the year 2000, at the age of 15, Lady True graduates from university with PhDs in astrophysics, nuclear fission, bioengineering, and nanochemistry. In 2007, we get our first look at Nostalgia, the drug. However, Nostalgia was previously the name of Adrian Veidt's cosmetics line that dates back to the 70s. Nostalgia would later be banned after widespread misuse and addiction. This is also the last year Adrian Veidt was seen in public before he retreated to Karnak. This is also the rough estimate of where young Bian was born, the clone. Now, we don't exactly know how Bian was cloned, if it was a normal birth or maybe some sort of device. This could affect the accuracy of this date. In 2008, Johnny Cochran, the same man who defended O.J. Simpson, fights for reparations, or as they've been deemed in the show, Redfordations. These are tax breaks for African Americans affected by the Tulsa Massacre. 2008 also sees Lady True visiting Adrian in Antarctica to tell him she's his daughter, and to ask for $42 billion to fund her quantum centrifuge, a device that could be used to transfer Dr. Manhattan's power to her. This request is denied by Adrian. 2009 is the year adult Angela meets Dr. Manhattan at a bar in Saigon on the 20th anniversary of her parents' death. 6 months after they meet, they get in a fight which Manhattan predicted, which sends Manhattan looking for help from Adrian. Manhattan wants to be more human, so Adrian gives him the tachyon ring, which allows him to forget he has powers. In return, Manhattan sends him to Europa, where he can be a god and live in peace. But before Manhattan absorbs the ring, he visits Will Reeves, who now lives in Captain Metropolis's home, and divulges his entire plan for the next 10 years, a plan that will shape all the events going forward. With plans now in motion, Angela places the ring in Manhattan's forehead, essentially giving him amnesia, and they venture to Tulsa to start a new life together. 2010 sees Lady True launching Voyager probes into space, the same type of probe that Adrian will later come into contact with on Europa. It's here we begin the Adrian saga. Every episode of Watchmen, with the exception of episode 6, features a segment of Adrian's life on Europa, each of them spaced 1 year apart, judging by the anniversary candles we see on his cakes. The first year is basically an introduction to his life here. He rides his horse, writes a play, eats a cake, and is also given a horseshoe, which is a setup for his eventual escape 9 episodes episodes later. 2011 is year 2 on Europa. Phillips and Crookshanks perform a play about Dr. Manhattan, which Adrian wrote over the past year. 2012 is year 3, where Adrian catapults Phillips outside the sphere. He kills one of the buffalo and receives a stern warning from the game warden not to disobey his rules. This is also the year back on Earth that Adrian is officially declared missing. 2013 is year 4, and we're introduced to the fetus-like and that machine that turns them into adult versions of Phillips and Crookshanks. Year 5, Adrian launches himself from the catapult and creates the "Save Me Daughter" message, which will later be sent back to Lady True, who sends a spacecraft to retrieve him. Year 6 is not too kind to Adrian, as he's sentenced to jail for his crime of leaving the boundaries of Europa. 2016 is year 7. In a special scene in the end credits of the episode, Adrian is given a cake with 7 candles in it, celebrating his 7 years on Europa. This cake will include a horseshoe he will use to dig himself out when the space pod eventually arrives. On Earth, December 25th of this year marks the White Night, a night in which members of the 7th Cavalry took up arms against the police force. This is also the night Angela is saved by Dr. Manhattan, and the night where one of Senator Keene's cavalry members is teleported to Gila Flats, New Mexico. This event alerts Keene that Manhattan, who's the only one who can teleport others, is somewhere in Tulsa, and sets in motion his plan to transfer Manhattan's powers to himself. The White Night is also the catalyst for Angela becoming Sister Night. 2017 marks Adrian's escape, which coincidentally lines up with the year Lady True takes over Vite Enterprises. He begins his 2-year-long journey in cryo back to Earth. It's here the Defensive Policeman Act is passed, which sees officers having to mask up to keep their anonymity, a direct result of the White Night. In 2018, Judd becomes the Tulsa PD Chief of Police, and it's around this time, according to a 2018 PDpedia article, that groundbreaking on the Millennium Clock begins. Now we have September 2019, where the main events of the show take place. I won't go over all of them since I have detailed episodic breakdowns for each episode you should really check out, but it ends in late September with True's demise, Manhattan nowhere to be found, and Angela about to see if she can walk on water. The last entry is October 2019, and it can only be found on PDpedia. It informs us that Agent Dale Peedy has been fired from the FBI as he refused to return to Washington, preferring to stay in Tulsa to uncover the deaths of Lady True and Senator Keene. In this piece, it's heavily implied that Peedy is Lube Man. Now, if you haven't seen my Watchmen Season 1 ending explained, please go check it out, and make sure to give this video a like and leave your thoughts in the comments below. If the show's back for Season 2, I hope to expand on this timeline as new entries get added. Check out my Twitter at ThinkStoryYT, and until next time, remember, Daddy loves you very much.